Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. Mr. Bumble, seeing with excruciating feelings the delight of the two old paupers, who were tittering together most rapturously, hesitated for an instant. Mrs. Bumble, whose patience brooked no delay, caught up a bowl of soap suds, motioning him towards the door, ordered him instantly to depart, on pain of receiving the contents upon his portly person. What could Mr. Bumble do? He looked dejectedly round, and slunk away as he reached the door. The titterings of the paupers broke into a shrill chuckle of irrepressible delight. It wanted but this. He was degraded in their eyes. He had lost caste and station before the very paupers. He had fallen from all the height and pomp of beadleship to the lowest depth of the most snubbed hen-peckery. "All in 2 months," said Mr. Bumble, filled with dismal thoughts. 2 months. No more than 2 months ago, I was not only my own master, but everybody else's, so far as the parochial workhouse was concerned. And now? It was too much. Mr. Bumble boxed the ears of the boy who opened the gate for him, for he had reached the portal in his reverie, and walked distractedly into the street. He walked up one street and down another, until his exercise had abated the first passion of his grief, and then the revulsion of feeling made him thirsty. He passed a great many public houses, but at length paused before one in a byway, whose parlor, as he gathered from a hasty peep over the blinds, was deserted, save by one solitary customer. It began to rain heavily at the moment. This determined him. Mr. Bumble stepped in, and, ordering something to drink as he passed the bar, entered the apartment into which he had looked from the street. The man who was seated there was tall and dark, and wore a large cloak. He had the air of a stranger, and seemed, by a certain haggardness in his look, as well as by the dusty soils of his dress, to have travelled some distance. He eyed Bumble askance as he entered, but scarcely deigned to nod his head in acknowledgment of his salutation. Mr. Bumble had quite dignity enough for two, supposing even that the stranger had been more familiar, so he drank his gin and water in silence, and read the paper with great show of pomp and circumstance. It so happened, however, as it will happen very often, when men fall into company under such circumstances, that Mr. Bumble felt, every now and then, a powerful inducement which he could not resist, to steal a look at the stranger, and that whenever he did so, he withdrew his eyes, in some confusion, to find that the stranger was at that moment stealing a look at him. Mr. Bumble's awkwardness was enhanced by the very remarkable expression of the stranger's eye, which was keen and bright, but shadowed by a scowl of distrust and suspicion, unlike anything he had ever observed before, and repulsive to behold. When they had encountered each other's glance several times in this way, the stranger, in a harsh, deep voice, broke silence. "Were you looking for me," he said, "when you peered in at the window?" "Not that I am aware of, unless you're Mr. Here Mr. Bumble stopped short, for he was curious to know the stranger's name, and thought in his impatience he might supply the blank. "I see you were not," said the stranger, and an expression of quiet sarcasm playing about his mouth. "Or you have known my name. You don't know it, or I would recommend you not to ask for it." "I meant no harm, young man," observed Mr. Bumble majestically. "And have done none," said the stranger. Another silence succeeded this short dialogue, which was again broken by the stranger. "I've seen you before, I think," said he. "You were differently dressed at that time, and I only passed you in the street. But I should know you again. You were beadle here once, were you not?" I was, said Mr. Bumble, in some surprise, parochial beadle. Just so, rejoined the other, nodding his head. It was in that character I saw you. What are you now? Master of the workhouse, rejoined Mr. Bumble, slowly and impressively, to check any undue familiarity the stranger might otherwise assume. Master of the workhouse, young man? You have the same eye to your own interest that you always had, I doubt not, resumed the stranger, looking keenly into Mr. Bumble's eyes, as he raised them in astonishment at the question. Don't scruple to ask so freely, man. I know you pretty well, you see. I suppose a married man, replied Mr. Bumble, shading his eyes with his hand, and surveying the stranger, from head to foot, in evident perplexity, is not more averse to turning an honest penny when he can than a single one. Parochial officers are not so well paid that they can afford to refuse any little extra fee when it comes to them in a civil and proper manner. The stranger smiled, and nodded his head again, as much to say he had not mistaken his man, then rang the bell. Fill this glass again, he said, handing Mr. Bumble's empty tumbler to the landlord. Let it be strong and hot. You like it so, I suppose? Not too strong, replied Mr. Bumble, with a delicate cough. You understand what that means, landlord, said the stranger, dryly. The host smiled and disappeared, and shortly afterwards returned with a steaming jorum, of which the first gulp brought the water into Mr. Bumble's eyes. Now listen to me, said the stranger, after closing the door and window. I came down to this place today to find you out, and by one of those chances which the devil throws in the way of his friends sometimes, you walked into the very room I was sitting in, while you were uppermost in my mind. I want some information from you. I don't ask you to give it for nothing, slight as it is. Put up that, to begin with. As he spoke, he pushed a couple of sovereigns across the table to his companion, carefully, as though unwilling that the chinking of money should be heard without. When Mr. Bumble had scrupulously examined the coins to see that they were genuine, and had put them up, and with much satisfaction, in his waistcoat pocket, he went on. Carry your memory back. Let me see, 12 years last winter? It's a long time, said Mr. Bumble. Very good, I've done it. The scene, the workhouse? Good. And the time, night? Yes. And the place, the crazy hole? Wherever it was in which miserable drabs brought forth the life and health so denied to themselves, gave birth to pulling children for the parish to rear, and hid their shame, wrought 'em in the grave. The lying-in room, I suppose, said Mr. Bumble, not quite following the stranger's excited description. Yes, said the stranger, a boy was born there. A many boys, observed Mr. Bumble, shaking his head despondingly. A murrain on the young devils, cried the stranger. I speak of one, a meek-looking, pale-faced boy, who was apprenticed down here to a coffin-maker. I wish he had made his coffin and screwed his body in it, and who afterwards ran away to London as it was supposed. Why, you mean Oliver, young Twist, said Mr. Bumble. I remember him, of course. There wasn't an obstinater young rascal. It's not of him I want here. I've heard enough of him, said the stranger, stopping Mr. Bumble in the outset of a tirade on the subject of poor Oliver's vices. It's of a woman, the hag that nursed his mother. Where is she? Where is she? Said Mr. Bumble, whom the gin and water had rendered facetious. It would be hard to tell. There's no midwifery there, whichever place she's gone to, so I suppose she's out of employment anyway. What do you mean? Demanded the stranger sternly. That she died last winter, rejoined Mr. Bumble. The man looked fixedly at him when he had given this information, and although he did not withdraw his eyes for some time afterwards, his gaze gradually became vacant and abstracted, and he seemed lost in thought. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.